Hello, this is Nick Nielsen of Grand Strategy, The View from Oregon. Today, explaining Mojo. Somewhere I read that Bertrand Russell never went to a film until he read Bergson, who had invoked a cinematographic conception of movement in one of his philosophical treatises, and Russell wanted to see exactly what Bergson had in mind. I don't know whether or not the story is true, but it presents Russell as a coldly rational philosopher who only stooped to engage with popular culture when it figured in the argument for a theory. I will risk painting myself into a similar corner by sharing an anecdote that will perhaps make me appear even more coldly rational than the reader will already have ascertained, but hopefully it also demonstrates my ability and my willingness to learn. Some years ago, I was talking with a friend, and although I have no recollection how the topic came up, we somehow began discussing the song L.A. Woman by The Doors. I have never enjoyed the music of The Doors, and I said so plainly, and perhaps I also added something to the effect that this particular song never made any sense to me. My friend at the time then set about to explain the song L.A. Woman to me. He was, when I knew him, I haven't seen him in many years, an enthusiastic explainer of all matters, sometimes to the point of undertaking socially inappropriate explanation, sort of like Gertrude Stein's characterization of Ezra Pound as a village explainer. Explaining a song or a work of art is sort of like explaining a joke. Firstly, any explanation is likely to be inadequate and misleading, and secondly, if you have to have it explained to you, you'll probably never understand. That is to say, if you gotta ask, you'll never know. Nevertheless, my friend at the time rose admirably to the challenge and actually did a good job of explaining the song to me in terms I could appreciate and understand. Up until this conversation, I don't know that I had ever been explicitly aware of the word mojo. I may well have heard it, but apparently it didn't make any impression on me. So what is mojo? We can, as usual, rely upon the Urban Dictionary to give us a good idea of mojo. The Urban Dictionary gives as its first definition, quote, mojo. The word originally means a charm or a spell, but now is more commonly said as meaning sex appeal or talent. I can get any girl if I just use a bit of the old mojo. Man, that girl has mojo. God help me, I think I've lost my mojo. Unquote. And this second definition of mojo, also in the Urban Dictionary, gives a bit more detail. Quote, mojo, noun, 1. Self-confidence, self-assuredness, as in basis for belief in oneself in a situation, especially in context of contest or display of skill, such as sexual advances or going into battle. 2. Good luck fetish, charm to bolster confidence. 3. Ability to bounce back from debilitating trauma and negative attitude. He lost his mojo when she dumped him. He got his mojo back now. Unquote. While self-confidence and self-assuredness are sufficiently general that they do not limit us to the kind of sex appeal central to the first definition, now that I have had some years to think about the phenomenon of mojo, I think it is even more general than self-confidence, and that it is in fact something that philosophers and economists have also written about. At the young age of 22, Immanuel Kant wrote a short treatise entitled Thoughts on the Estimation of the Animal Powers. Schopenhauer amusingly said of this early Kantian effort, quote, Kant wrote a treatise on the vital powers. I should prefer to write a dirge for them, unquote. That's from Schopenhauer's essay on noise. Kant returned to the vital powers in his Opus Posthumum, where he distinguished 4 aspects of the vital powers or animal powers, animalische Potenzen. Quote, the skillful initiator of motions for the preservation of vital force rests on the employment of 4 animal powers. 1. On nervous power as a principle of excitability, incitabilitas Browni. 2. On muscular power, irritabilitas Halleri. 3. On a force which preserves all the organic forces of nature as a constant alteration of the former 2, of which one phenomenon is heat. 4. On the organization of a whole of organic beings of different species for each other, serving for the species' preservation, unquote. Keynes seems to have been talking about something similar, although instead of mojo or animal powers, he refers to animal spirits. Quote, most probably, of our decisions to do something positive, the full consequences of which will be drawn out over many days to come, can only be taken as the result of animal spirits, a spontaneous urge to action rather than inaction, and not as the outcome of a weighted average of quantitative benefits multiplied by quantitative probabilities, unquote. That is from The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, 1935, Book 4, Chapter 12, Section 7, page 161. This is a very famous passage of Keynes' general theory that is frequently cited, and I think it is entirely appropriate to consider Mojo in its economic context. If Keynes is right, most of civilization is attributable to a spontaneous urge to action, that is, to Mojo. This is a point also made by Kenneth Clark in his book and television series Civilization, in which Clark made a reference to the effect that all great movements in civilization have a weight of energy behind them. Perhaps the most detailed account of vital energies or animal spirits is to be found in William James' 1907 essay on the energies of men. Quote, I wish to spend this hour on one conception of functional psychology, a conception never mentioned or heard of in laboratory circles, but used perhaps more than any other by common practical men. I mean the conception of the amount of energy available for running one's mental and moral operations by. Practically everyone knows in his own person the difference between the days when the tide of energy is high in him and those when it is low, though no one knows exactly what reality the term energy covers when used here, or what its tides, tensions, and levels are in themselves. This vagueness is probably the reason why our scientific psychologists ignore the conception altogether. It undoubtedly connects itself with the energies of the nervous system, but it presents fluctuation that cannot easily be translated into neural terms. It offers itself as the notion of a quantity, but its ebbs and flows produce extraordinary qualitative results. To have its level raised is the most important thing that can happen to a man, yet in all my reading, I know of no single page or paragraph of a scientific psychology book in which it receives mention. Thus psychologists have left it to be treated by the moralists and mind curers and doctors exclusively, unquote. James went on to discuss in more detail the absence of vital energies. Quote, everyone is familiar with the phenomenon of feeling more or less alive on different days. Everyone knows on any given day that there are energies slumbering him which the incitements of the day do not call forth, but which he might display if these were greater. Most of us feel as if we lived habitually with a sort of cloud weighing on us, below our highest notch of clearness in discernment, sureness in reasoning, or firmness in deciding. Compared with what we ought to be, we are only half awake. Our fires are damped, our drafts are checked. We are making use of only a small part of our possible mental and physical resources, unquote. I have thought a lot about vital energies during my adult years, though I have thought about them pretty much in terms of James' essay, and only recently connected this philosophical idea with the popular cultural idea of mojo. These apparently erudite considerations, also apparently distant from Jim Morrison's evocation of mojo in the song L.A. Woman, are all ultimately about the expression of vital energy in the various spheres of human activity, unless one wants to reduce the evocation of Mr. Mojo Rising to an anagram of Jim Morrison, as if that were the only thing it meant. Call it mojo or vital powers or animal spirits, it all pretty much expresses the same thing. I suspect that most people experience mojo, insofar as they do experience it at all, in connection with sex appeal or in relation to, quote, contest or display of skills such as sexual advances or going into battle, unquote, as in the Urban Dictionary definition cited earlier. But mojo is not limited to these contexts. Mojo extends as far as one's life experiences extend, and especially anyone involved in any creative endeavor knows instinctively and intuitively the central role that one's vital powers play in creative activity. In a recently recorded spoken word production of an older blog post, an interview in Starbucks, I noted that I had hesitated to write about a particular passage in Husserl because I didn't feel that my powers were yet equal to the task. Sometimes vital powers are very specific, and in this sense, one can feel within oneself when one has attained the level one must attain in order to take on a particular project, or that one has not yet acquired the necessary powers and must continue to store up one's vital energies for the moment when that arrives. When one feels in full possession of one's vital energies, when one's vital energy is at the flood tide, as William James has it, one feels as though one can take on the world. One does not usually think of intellectuals as particularly energetic individuals, but intellectual activity too is entirely dependent upon mastering one's vital energies. Bertrand Russell said somewhere, and I can't remember where, and I can't find the quote now that I've looked for it, that at what stage of his life he had the energy of 20 locomotives. The cultivation of one's personal vital powers is, or ought to be, a kind of division of practical philosophy. In his lectures on Practical Philosophy, the Greco-Roman Moralists, Luke Timothy Johnson comes at the philosophy of classical antiquity not from the perspective of philosophical theories, but from the perspective of practical wisdom in dealing with life. We need just such a discipline in the modern world in order to cultivate our vital energies and thereby accomplish those things we hope to accomplish in life. Most people, I think, learn these skills by trial and error. Skills such as avoiding people who drag you down and who sap your strength, while systematically seeking out activities that make one feel energized and fully alive. Such skills can be the difference between being overwhelmed by the world on the one hand, and on the other hand, feeling that one is the master of one's destiny and that one is in control of one's fate. In contemporary psychotherapy, individuals who are vulnerable to being overwhelmed by the world are taught coping skills, which are practices, once again, that most people learn themselves by trial and error, but some people apparently need to be taught coping skills. One might think of the cultivation of vital energies for creative projects as coping skills for the fully functional. That is to say, if one is getting on fine in regard to the daily grind of the ordinary business of life, one is fully functional. But in order to take the next step and to create something new in the face of an indifferent and possibly hostile world, additional cognitive and emotional resources are needed. Insofar as coping skills can be explicitly formulated, I have to wonder if coping skills for the fully functional, in order to master vital energies and undertake creative projects, might be amenable to an explicit formulation. In other words, can Mojo be formalized? But that will be an inquiry for another time. Thank you.